Oh, hello. Come out if you like. Okay, I'm closing this. And good morning. I feel I should leave the microphone on the wider pickup sometimes. The lovely sound of birds around me. I would argue the stray cat that seems to have made friends with my back porch step. We have been feeding it, so I guess we've been making friends with it, but it appreciates cuddles more. It's a previously domesticated cat. We're going to rehouse it. It's going to go live with the children. We already have a cat. Now our cat wouldn't rehouse very well. Welcome to the channel. If you're wondering what this is all about, it's hard to say if the camera caught my shoes before, but if it did catch my shoes, I'm wearing what I affectionately refer to as my old man shoes. Probably lifted from a Disney movie, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. They're leather shoes, but I get a bit of broguing in them. Not really my style of shoe. I needed them for a role in my life, and they were on a good markdown, and so I bought shoes that I feel socially embarrassed to wear. They weren't my old Rockport World Travellers, which I think I bought 3 sets over 15 years. I'd get 5 years a piece out of them. I'd play soccer with the children. They were just good, long-lasting shoes. But I guess out of necessity, I wound up with these shoes that I'm not a fan of fashionably. I do feel more mature when I wear them. Good comfortable shoes for a longish walk. The purpose of these videos is to give myself the freedom to not be focused on the walk, but more the talk. I like to think some people come along and just watch these things just for the Australian bushwalk. Probably turn the volume down. I'm okay with that. The nature of the Greek chorus, I suppose, is where the brains all sit around and they throw their ideas out. Mostly as a chance to hear them out loud. It's usually a good way to explore concepts. If you feel really silly saying something, you know it probably is. And it can be a good way to explore concepts. I know I like to mansplain a lot of things to my partner, who I think is the superior person to me in every regard. A person with their life together. And their ability to never complain. Well, as a mature person, I come to self-help videos that talk about the brain chemistry process, I suppose, of venting. And I get to the ends of these little clips and I realise, you know what, that technique that my partner's had all their life, It's actually an advanced one. Serves them really well. Certainly something I find very attractive. Not bad as silence. I always make the joke that through a lack of communication, in all the time, probably approaching a decade that we've been together, never having an argument, I see that as unhealthy. That there must be a lack of expression happening, at least on one of our behalves. Possibly both. I don't know. No, not at all. But that, I make the comments that, oh, well, one day I won't wake up. There'll be an ice pick through my head. And we both sort of, being jovial in nature, we both go to make the joke that, I'll be like, oh no, there'll be something easier to pick up on the way to the garden shed, like a trowel or something. And the missus will be saying something, but we'll be talking over each other, joking. We do like to keep it jovial, but I'll take a few steps back. The concept of me mansplaining lots of technology to them is really handy for me, because something I learnt when doing tech support is if you can break things down in ways that people can understand, usually with visual imagery or sidetracking away from the technically complex thing that's causing stress, and people can get their bearings on it, they feel comfortable and confident again with the topic at hand. And I'm an ardent believer in teach a person to fish. That is to say that you put the time in once, and ideally give someone a skill that they don't just need to come to you on a daily basis, go and give me fish. Give me fish, like that little cat on the back porch. Give me fish. So, setting a person up for independence. These talks, right, I like to believe that we still have the notion of a Greek chorus, where, I might have that term wrong, but the capability of their society to get into discussion for the betterment. And I guess as a technologist all my life, I have lots of opinions on technology, and I have a consumer bent focus. That is to say, I'm very concerned about consumerism and getting good value for money, and it's not necessarily for the good value for money component of it, but more so the fact that I guess I have an environmental interest, and I don't believe the world can sustain a planet where we need to constantly resell the same products over and over again, just as an effort to push money uphill to just a few companies. And so it's fair to say I've spent most of my life, wherever possible, trying to buy things in the second-hand market. And that's just something I take from the hi-fi industry or audio as my hobby, where there's a saying that's, I have champagne tastes on a beer budget. Now, neither of those are beverages I've ever been interested in drinking, but the saying is sound that, for example, in hi-fi, I like to listen to the good quality equipment, but I certainly don't wish to have to outlay the big dollars to get there. And so what I might do is engage the other image stabilizer mode. Oop. Right, this should be lock. Should now be able to just, like a tripod, hold a frame. Alright, so the notion of complex technical discussion covered in my morning walk and talk. Now, I've covered what the morning walk and talks are. The nature is that if a person wakes up and before the detritus of the day gets into the forethoughts, to be able to enjoy exploring one's mind when it's in a relative state of peace, it's just a nice place to be. And so I don't mind doing these walks where I don't get too caught up on focusing the camera like I have right now. And more the idea is that I just cover a topic. And I can get a little bit off topic sometimes. I think the improved format of these would be for me to have some key points written down on a piece of paper on the back of my camera that I can redress. So please bear with me. I do like to respect that of other people who like to use these footpaths in the morning. Sometimes that forces me to get a little bit creative with my cameraing, and you'll quite often notice that I don't always point across the footpath. And that is just, again, to give people their privacy when they also enjoy these public spaces, which are just fantastic for filming. See here, we've got an Australian sunrise shedding this glorious light onto all these objects. And in fact, our cameras in our country don't need the vivid colours that has become all the vogue in later years. Everyone's colour accuracy, just like in audio, right? Like, digital flavouring, that's all the rage. It's like, yeah, now that nobody's building anything to sound accurate, it's all about, nobody's wrong. Digital flavouring. Same with cameras, all the good camera companies that had colour accuracy and nice capability either through their lenses or whatever. It's like, no, the electronic companies come along, we're saturate and rich. I actually see good arguments for that as a technology. If you're in a place where your natural landscape isn't beautifully coloured already. In fact, I feel sad right now I'm not out with the Fuji, which is, I think, the vastly better camera for colour than the Panasonic I'm recording with. The Panasonic's better for video, for filming, for smooth, if you will. But I mean, I don't do any post-production, I don't do colour grading, and I'm getting wildly off topic here. I don't care to talk about the technology in my hand. But making things work for us means that as a conscientious consumer, we generally all, at some level, find ourselves on the internet doing research on a potential future purchase. And I guess that's the only potential benefit of me, if I was doing a channel, what I would have to offer. Because I've done that research on so many different product lines. I have quite a few different hobbies. And they all have slightly different needs in terms of research. And just bear with me, I'm going to open that up a bit. There we go. It's a bit later in the day than I care to do these videos. I do like to capture a bit earlier in the morning. This time of day I'm generally due at home to make the coffees, so it's going to be a fairly short one today, but I do have some topics to talk about, which, if I'd been redressing my pieces of paper, right, future format, right, the improved, right, the measure of a person, you don't have to be better than anyone else, just be better than yourself yesterday. Not verbatim, but I kind of feel that's a thing. So, yeah, conceptually, this auto-optimization, auto-fixing things, right? Computers started this in the late 90s. I used to set all my manual networking up in Windows. And then as plug and play became a thing, which all of the techies, well, not all of the techies, but I think we affectionately referred to it as plug and pray, because Windows didn't get it right, ever, usually. Oh, sorry to laugh there. I guess that's just pain exiting my body, all those hours of support. But when we manually set up our networks, things worked really well, and I actually recall a situation once where I was trying to configure an office printer, and I'd been on this call out, and I generally get every job done in an hour, and on this instance I'd gone over the hour mark, and just out of ego I didn't want to bill until the second hour, and I'm literally ringing up IT friends that I'd known since teenage years, people that I'd maybe started on their path and helped them in the early years, but then they'd become really top tier in their respective fields, and their brothers, that there's, and a range of different friends. Again, if you've always hung out in IT circles, you've got a pretty good pool of knowledge to draw on. And I recall just this particular network And it was a network printer, but it was a bunch of the machines were set manually and some of the machines were set to auto. And basically what it was coming down to is the order of the devices were being turned on in the morning was creating an issue for the end user where things weren't consistent. And I mean, this is 20 odd years ago now that I was servicing these people, and I just recall thinking at the time, auto fix in a lot of ways equals auto fail. And I certainly preferred the old school method of teach a person to fish, get them to understand their settings. And they were in a better position to, certainly when the road gets rough, when you find yourself in off-road territory, knowing what you've got to do to your tyres to continue on, just knowing how to carry yourself in a given situation. Because it's generally that's the moment where you don't have the phone reception and you can't get the help you need. And so it's better for a person to know how to troubleshoot things for themselves or to handle. And I say this because the upshot of it, after 20 years of everything becoming auto fix and auto just work, is that we've actually now got the exact opposite. That we have everything auto break, and it's actually used as a method to sell us new technology. And part of that is to do with forced firmware updates and all the junk that is modern consumerism. That there's only so many fat cats to sell the lucrative products to. And fat cats are great customers because when something breaks, they don't complain. They just go and buy another product, right? They don't waste time with your tech support, and they don't demand warranty and put the costs back on the manufacturer. Their time is considered to be more important than a little bit of cash. They've got plenty of that, but everyone's got finite time. So in the upper socio-economic sectors, it's just easier. Just throw money at the issue and have it go away. But of course, most of my life I volunteer for, be it the pensioners or the single parents, or I've been the president of the P&C at the local school and seeing the wide cross in a country area, no less, and just seeing the wide cross section of the society, of the community. And everybody has different needs, and I'm more than happy many times in my life to volunteer, basically free IT work, or so cheap as to be free IT work and just not charge at all the number of hours being done. I'm not trying to upsell myself there, just acknowledging that not everybody, the burdens that the planet has presently with regard to technology isn't one that we're ready for in terms of as things change and what's going to happen. Because we've seen in the last 8 to 10 years that a lot of the larger companies have just learnt to sell a new product to a certain subset of people who are willing to be cashed up and pay for the new product. And that's just become the business model. And so once one of the leading companies went, oh no, we're going to put security updates with operating system updates. And that was fair in their ecosystem because they didn't force people forward all the time, and they had very long hardware support life cycles. But then all the other companies that don't make money via their software shop, that actually need to make their money selling hardware, when they all followed suit, the most anti-consumer thing that I've ever seen has happened. The governments aren't big enough to stop corporations that have, in some cases, larger financial operating amounts of money or more pull over world markets, and therefore arguably control or the ability to stand their ground and not be tilted back in the favour of being pro the little person, the end user or the consumer. So this nature of auto-optimise, which essentially has now become auto-fail, and it's not always intentional. Some companies like Microsoft have made it intentional. Over the last 8 years, they were losing a console war, and so they did everything they could to break the productivity platform that was Windows PCs. Some of it being highly intentional things like, accidentally rolling out Windows 10 multiple times on your machine because they counted each one of those installs as an Xbox, and they needed to obfuscate to software developers that they had enough software or hardware unit sales in their ecosystem to justify making game software for them. And so some of that was just damn lies and statistics. But the problem was that when they needed to move gamers onto consoles, they needed to deprecate the capabilities of very, very high-end computing hardware. And so they really went to market and got a lot of players to build applets and widgets and even things like their own magnifier bogged down with extra voices that all just load up more memory and consume more CPU cores, and then limiting the CPU hardware scheduler to only be updated in Windows 11, so that you kind of got to be forced forward in order to get any capability for what you're paying for. To actually get it, you would have to jump ship. And the problem is now that they've given up in the console space briefly, because the PlayStation 5 Pro is so good that no journalist will talk about it. Well, no Western journalist. And Eastern journalists are too humble. There's just no talk about it, basically. It's just the best IT product on the planet, basically, for gaming, which you need a dedicated product. Otherwise, every family is better served by splitting their productivity product to be productive and keeping their gaming box separate, right? So at the moment, that's not the thing, but that's because the goalposts are constantly moving for one big company, and that they now need to, all of a sudden make PCs great again. The problem is, after 8 years of intentional getting in mediocre performance, gimping, if that's a non-PC word, I apologise there, but getting in mediocre performance is the way I deem it. They can't just revert that overnight. And even if they could, this is Microsoft, right? That's the intentional side of things. And there's the accidental side of things as well, which is just crazy. So, I mean, that's one platform that doesn't really serve end users' needs. But in the run to the middle, everyone trying to get to the top, all these mices treading the milk, was it the Christopher Walken saying in Catch Me If You Can, churning the butter, right? Everyone's so determined to make money that what they've all done to their products with these increased release cycles and consumers are starting to push back. We're starting to go, well, no, I don't want all the interfaces to change again. I don't want to have to relearn my device. I don't want to have to reset up my device. I don't want to lose time to something which I was buying conscientiously to assist me in my lifestyle or getting on with the things that actually mattered, which might be related to family or hobbies or anything else, right? Certainly not what the tech companies are insisting that is the focus, right? The focus is on them. And they figured out a while ago the metric was if you can force a customer to engage with the product for longer, there's a chance they might spend more money. And so on that rush to the middle, all the applets that we used to get in our various products, from cameras or photo editing software, all that's been pulled out, because if you go via the shop to get these basic applets that these devices always had, once they became smart and useful to us, they're now all missing them, right? And it's all on this simple statistic or metric that if a user spends more time engaging with your product, there's a chance you'll make money off them. So it's all really working against us. And I see that in particular with a piece of software that it's lost a lot of sales upon coming out. It's called Alien Rogue Incursion. It's a virtual reality game. It's got a whole bunch of bugbears, and one of them is it's using one of the world's most advanced gaming engines for rendering really beautiful graphics to the screen. And it typically requires being in a fairly low resolution state, just on the nature of it has hundreds of thousands of more triangles in any given scene. And so if you look at a keyboard, like a computer keyboard rendered in the game world, all the keys will actually have rounded edges. Like, they won't just be made up of what would be 8 polygons or 10 polygons to represent a key. Or 10 years ago, a whole keyboard might be represented with 20 polygons, or polygon being a triangle, right? You can use 2 triangles to any given side to make a square, rectangle. And so a keyboard would need the 4 edges of the top surface, and then you just put a texture of a photo of what would look like keys on top of that. And in the old world style, you would then have to make the graphics really, really high resolution so that the sharp edges and everything would not look obvious. But in the new style, rendering that keyboard out of tens of thousands of triangles means that all the keys have cornered edges. They're all individually recessing into a depth that could all be lit, right? And so all the edges of the keys respond to the lighting of the environment. And to say that the burden on our computers to render in this new Unreal Engine 5 technology is pretty high is an understatement. And so all the first waves of gamers are running it at a lower resolution than the games before them. And basically the consumers haven't been educated to understand that what used to be vogue, which was like cameras, more megapixels is better, right? And all the camera companies regretted teaching consumers that, because it turned out the lens is probably the most important aspect. And then arguments, the processing engine after you've sampled the colour and contrast of the scene is also fairly important. So in the computing world, we've always sort of realised that the higher resolution you go was the more impressive the graphics. And now that's just no longer true. We can do these low-res games, or low-res game worlds, that because of the sheer number of triangles or polygons that are making up the scene, there's just so much more detail, and you don't have to take them to ridiculously high resolutions to make them work. But I just give the basis of anything I'm usually talking about, so as I don't know who my target audience is. It might be people who are a little bit tech agnostic. I wouldn't blame them if it was you kind of rejected technology as much as you could in order to have a healthy lifestyle where you engage with people and just feel happy. So, that might be, I believe that's sort of the people I align with. But we all have to cross into the tech world at some point. So having someone break down stuff might be important. But I like to do this as a point of discussion. I'd like to think that the comments get filled with people saying, well, what did you mean when you said that? And I can say, well, actually, that's the exact opposite of what I was meaning to say right there. Because the nature of my brain running ahead in conversation and trying to think of the next thing, and I'm thinking of what the opposite of it is and how that's bad. And then when I'm trying to say the positive, I get it inversed. I say, like a Freudian slip, the thing I'm trying to avoid talking about or trying to skirt around. It's just the nature of dialogue. But I cringe a lot when I watch my videos. Go, look, 3 times in that 40-minute video I said the exact opposite of what I was trying to say. That'd be confusing. Nobody ever picks me up or cares or challenges me. So at the moment, where my channel is at, I just leave them up there, waiting for the inevitable somebody correcting me, which is actually the stage of engagement. And that's the thing I like the most, right? That's how we all go forward. We're better when we work together. So this game that auto-optimises itself in ways that makes it really hard to tune. And it's the first time I've ever had a video game I basically can't tune. Now, fortunately, I was just going via what does everybody else experience with this game when using it. I'm happy off playing it on PlayStation. I don't have anything to worry about, right? When I want a game, I hit power on, and within 30 seconds I'm gaming, right? And that's bliss. And as a technologist and a PC technician, and with specifically a focus on tuning gaming PCs and configuring games boxes to work very well at a hardware and software level, the fact that I basically refuse to game in the PC ecosystem is very telling of the direction that we've just pushed too far, right? The people at the front of the pack have fallen off the cliff, and a lot of them have just gone, well, that's it, I'm doing other things. And they've either rejected technology altogether, or they've found other ways to get their fix. But a lot of other people are still in their lemming march right behind them, and they just don't know what's coming up ahead. They know there's something exciting up ahead, right? There's a lot of head bobbing. But they can't really see far enough to really know yet. And the problem is the people that would normally lead them to safety are no longer leading the charge. They're too frustrated or too fatigued, and they've just given up or moved to other focuses. Case in point. So I find myself servicing a game only because of all the negative press, which basically makes me think that people don't understand it. I'm playing it on a console with half the graphics grunt of my PC and having a wonderful experience. And everyone's saying it's an unoptimized mess. And so I start tinkering with it on the PC, and I find it works wonderfully on a machine that's like 7 generations below minimum spec or something. Like, it's just ridiculous, right? I shouldn't technically be able to run it, arguably, based on the news that the unhappy people who are telling everybody versus the happy people out there that are just happy using it, right? And they're not jumping on forums and talking it up. Because I see the nature of cancel culture in full effect, and the effect of what a few voices on the internet can have to the bottom line or sales of a product, I've taken this one in my stride, because it's actually it's an intellectual property that's close to my heart. Even though I don't do horror movies, arguably, I did find that the Alien franchise, we've had Ridley Scott, we've had Joss Whedon, we've had scripts by Twohy, we've had James Cameron, we've had all the biggest and best directors take punts. And we've even had crossovers with other intellectual properties, arguably. And it's a fleshed out universe. It's great sci-fi. It's everything as a teenager when I was growing up that I could fully get into. So I take it a little bit to heart that when it's suffering in the public space so much, and as far as I can figure, the studio has... They worked all through their Christmas break, right? Like they basically took no time off over Christmas or New Year's to keep putting out patches to make the game just better and better and better. And they keep bending their knee. They keep changing up their gameplay software vision to be malleable so that anybody can make it whatever they want, right? There's no ego on these people. They're actually taking the hits on the chin and going, yeah, the next patch will fix it, without sort of saying to anybody like, oh, maybe learn how to configure your machines, or maybe it's not as bad as you say it is. But they're a really humble studio, and they're just doing the best by everybody, and they're still getting grilled. And so the nature of internet cancel culture just annoying me to the nth degree, I'm more than willing to challenge and go in there and test it for myself. And so after weeks and weeks of testing, the verdict I've come up with is that auto-optimize or auto-fix is what's actually auto-breaking. And yeah, it's affecting one particular studio. Whether they can keep their lights on and pay their wages, they'll probably have made that much money. But it's also nice to be paid some profits if you put in years and years and years of time on a project. And they certainly deserve more credit than they're getting. And so, having fired off an email to the studio yesterday to basically say, look, it's the auto-optimize systems in the engine that stop the player tweaking any of the menus in the front of house from being able to squeeze out of the product what they should be able to get. So why does this all matter, and why have I segued into gaming when talking about tech? Well, there's new video cards that are about to come out, and of the two major video card players, one of them is highly anti-consumer and works off the if you break it, they'll have to buy it again adage, and they've been doing that now for a long time. It actually championed them a lot of customers in their ecosystem saying, oh, they work really hard on their drivers. It's like, no. They deem to have short and long shaders on a video card generation called Fermi as a way to claw back interest from consumers, because they had, at the time, long shaders and therefore less of them. Basically, each shader could do more math per pass. But the competitors had a lot of short shaders, but white belt consumers are easily hoodwinked by numbers. And at the time, it was true. The competitors had basically better cards for video gaming. But the Green Team, deemed, well, we've got to win the consumers back. We need to change up our dies a little bit. And so what we're going to do is we're going to turn a lot of these long shaders into short shaders so that by the numbers we don't look vastly inferior at the spec sheet level. Now, the moment they did that, they were committing to forever having to tune their graphics cards on a per game basis. Now, that wasn't such a bad thing. For a long time, they put the effort in tweaking every game, right? And the thing is that in the media sense of, the new drivers are out for this game, right? Everyone's like, yeah, it's increased performance. So everyone's seeing it as a win, right? So it actually worked in their favour. But it went against the grain of, at the time, it was the older video cards that had the weakest amount of capability were the ones that generally need the drivers optimised for. And so Red Team, which were Canadians, they were just ethical, and they just kept doing we'll optimise the older generation of video cards first because they're the ones that need it. And so spin on many years where the Green Team have used the manipulation of the shader length and sending any given piece of software down the short or long shader path as a way to curtail performance by an easy 20%. And so therefore they can sell really entry-level cards of the new generation to outpunch older generation cards from a higher tier, right? So they've been doing that over, sort of started at the 10 series, and it really allowed consumers to go, oh look, got to buy the new one, even a new cheap one will outpunch my older, really expensive one, right? So it's, in so many different ways, all these little anti-consumer things that the Green Team does has been working in their favour. But the biggest evil to the industry was around the time when the Red Team that couldn't convince consumers because they weren't spending lots of money on their driver teams optimising all the latest titles for their hardware, which basically didn't need it, right? Like, when they finally get around to optimising, the performance keeps going up, and everyone refers to Red Team's drivers as fine wine. That, the launch card, which hasn't been optimised out the gate with all the effort on it just to try to make the sales, over time, as it gets the driver updates that it should have always gotten or is due to get, the performance goes up, which is commensurate. It does what it needs to do to play the latest games in due time. But artificial benchmark suites and Green Team's ability to buy a lot of tech demos from specific games and to convince people that their technologies are essential constantly, because they buy up technologies in the market and create these little black boxes with auto-optimizing numbers in them, but they're not. They're auto-de-optimizing numbers. And they've always chosen the numbers that hurt the competitors the most. So there was a feature they used to have called Hairworks, and it lent on tessellation because the red team's cards weren't as strong at tessellation as a feature on the graphics card. And so Green Team's been doing very clever antics in a chess move game, arguably, but it's the end users or consumers that are easily hoodwinked. And they do their research, and the statistics, the science tells them that they're right. It's like, oh, look at these benchmarks, they're better. I'll pay 30% more money for 10% more performance. That's okay. It doesn't matter about the performance per watt or anything. It does when it's the only metric they've got to sell us. They'll change all the goalposts and they'll sell us completely different things. And the consumers, only following the marketing channels, will see the positive press and go, look, this is wonderful. Wow, the mid-range card now is nearly at the same electrical consumption of the high-end card. It's 76% the electrical consumption with 80% the performance of the high-end card from the generation before it. It's like, when have we ever compared cards that way? Like, never. Not for desktop computers. On a laptop it might matter. But if they've got nothing to sell us, they just move the goalposts, and all the positive press partners that are all in the Green Team's camp sell us the schlock, and we all drink the Kool-Aid. So what happened is that Red Team deemed we can't ever win. Basically, Green Team has so much more money than us that they wait for us to announce our pricing, and then they just shuffle their prices around to suit. If they make less profit in any given year, that's okay. They'll always have 10% more performance than us. Doesn't matter how much consumers have to spend for it. If it's $1,000 more or $500 more, the consumers argue, well, no, I just looked at the top-end card from both companies, and it didn't matter about the prices to me. I've got the money, right? Like, weird argument. But they will just say, oh, but I can get a better part in said Green Team. So Green Team's been very successful for many years by leveraging its much larger amount of money. And there's times when they've had to slip the higher end cards in the lineup down into the lower price tiers. And they don't say that, but if you look at the actual silicon that were all of a sudden being given in any given card, they've always done whatever they had to do to just manipulate the consumers. If it meant losing a bit of money, they would do it in the short term to keep that lead. Very, very fake lead. Anyway, AMD, the Red Team, deemed this is crazy, right? But we're in all the gaming consoles, and the lion's share of software is written for gaming consoles, right? 71 million PS5 consoles using AMD video chips. It doesn't matter how many PC enthusiasts buy Nvidia cards, right? Software is going to be written first and foremost for AMD. And Microsoft, never wanting to give up DirectX as the controlling way to keep games in their ecosystem, adopted AMD's application programming interface, what we call an API. It's the language a video card uses to get access to all of its features when software is programmed for it. So the basis of DirectX 12 was in fact AMD's API, because Microsoft could see Nvidia weaponizing, going, well, we're going to have to write our own API so that, games get optimized for our cards. And Microsoft didn't want to lose the ability to force gamers into Windows ecosystem. And so they went, well, we can't have everybody creating their own API, so we'll make DirectX as a basis, the AMD way, Vulkan or whatever it would have been at the time. And we'll have separate pathways for NVIDIA cards. But it all gets a bit weird because games are basically written first and foremost for the console ecosystem, meaning they have a lot of support for the AMD or the Red Team's feature set. And then NVIDIA will pay at the last minute when the game's coming to the PC. It'll actually pay companies to pull out the optimizations that are pro AMD. And I'll give an example of Tomb Raider, which used the AMD's method of tessellation to do the snow effects. And when they brought that game to PC, it's like, oh no, pull out the AMD method. It's been NVIDIA optimized, right? It's not a good thing when a game is NVIDIA optimized. It's poor for consumers, but don't let the truth get in the way of a good, brand new video card. So AMD gave up on trying to compete in the high-end space, and they decided, look, we won't sell cards to Hollywood going back to that generation I was talking about where Nvidia started doing short shaders and long shaders, they would limit the floating point performance on the cards down to about 1/16 through drivers. So they could sell a cheap card to consumers and an expensive card to Hollywood. The floating point being useful for lighting, basically, for if you want to render a bug's life. So Nvidia's always used drivers to manipulate the actual usability of their products and sell you new products. But AMD not necessarily. But they realised that having to keep a lot of the video chip die available for Hollywood, for functions that they might need that might not be needed by gamers, wasn't necessarily a win for gaming. And because AMD were in all the gaming consoles, it made sense to double down on gaming, and they did. And they cut out the bits of the chip that were needed by other market segments that Nvidia had to sell into. They made a lot of their money selling cards for Hollywood, and arguably a lot of their money selling cards to consumers. Maybe not as much money, but they had one foot in each of those pools, and so needed to service both customers. And the best way to keep the products cheap was to not make different products, right? It was to make one product and then use drivers to control the performance. So you could sell one card for $2,000 and one card for $200 without having to re-engineer anything. Just limit the floating point in drivers. So around the time when AMD pulled out the ray tracing capabilities, they made the perfect gaming card. And for a whole generation there, the super budget AMD cards were really good value for money. And Nvidia were freaking out, going, well, how are we going to compete against this? And so their method to compete became ray tracing. They literally went, well, what have they just cut out of their die? Oh, that's stuff that we still have to service Hollywood with. No worries. We've got 9 times the operating budget. We'll just use press partners and the media to make out like the most important thing on the planet to video gaming ever is ray tracing, right? And so by paying a lot of money to a handful of studios to hoodwink ray tracing into their games, and I bought into it. I used AMD cards, mind you, but I had all the titles I used to play in the 90s, like Quake and Descent and Portal. I could now play, not at 100 plus frames a second, but at like 30 or 40 frames a second with advanced ray tracing over the top. Right? Like, it wasn't a feature that served us. They were just tech demos. And they were tech demos where, once again, Nvidia had chosen the math numbers of their particular ways of doing ray tracing to hurt their own users, sure. But as long as it hurt the competitors even more, it would work out to make sales for them. And they could have backported the ray tracing to the 10 series, and they nearly did for a while there, that developers weren't developing, saying, oh, there's just not enough hardware in the market to be worthy of writing software for this. You can't pay us enough money, basically. And so Nvidia, they were willing to backport to earlier versions of Windows or earlier versions of DirectX for key, things like certain online games that had a large player base, right? So they were totally flexible at the software level, but they limit at the software level in terms of forcing consumers. That's always been their way. And if they're playing a little bit too nasty, then they get a little bit nicer on the software side, right? If they really haven't got a product to compete, they get a little bit nicer on the software side, just until, they own the market again. But a couple of years back, when AMD had pulled out the ray tracing components of their video chips and made the perfect gaming cards, they still couldn't convince consumers, right? Because consumers are like, yeah, but if we buy the competitor's card, we can still render all the games that you've got, but we also get to do these cool ray tracing effects that the media are telling us is really important. Now, it's been on a few years, and ray tracing is no longer, or Hollywood is no longer the other pool that Nvidia need to have their feet in. It's artificial intelligence. So this time round, they've got their toes in 3 different pools, right? If you can imagine a 3-legged being, right? It's not working for them. It's pulling them in all different directions. But they didn't want to make different silicon. That's costly. The best way to get the cost down is to make one bit of silicon. And the only way they were going to be able to be competitive in the AI space was to dedicate so much of the given die to artificial intelligence as a function. And so they leant heavy on it, really heavy, to the point where when the cards were coming out, they said that 15 out of 16 pixels are fake. That is to say, only 1/16 of the information is actually from the game and being generated, and the rest is guesswork. All right, now let's go back to the thread here, which is auto-optimize equals auto-fail. Right? In this case, auto-guess So we know that the first generation of products will need a lot of tuning, and we know that there's going to be a lot of graphical irregularities in certain aspects, and you don't have to turn that function on. You don't have to turn the frame generation on. You can just run the cards raw, but the problem is that they've only improved maybe 5 or 10% over last year's cards at a raw level, and that's not really enough to justify running out and buying the new cards. So all the buzz has got to be the frame generation, especially because that's the nature of their DLSS, right? This was a technology that they designed, no word of lie, because their ray tracing was so inefficient and breaking everything. They then had to come up with technologies that would allow them to build an off-world version of the screen at a really low res that they could then sample up based on where the lighting actually landed. And so it became, again, like the greatest thing ever for consumers, because they could finally run their ray tracing games at an acceptable frame rate and maybe hit the native resolution of their monitor. Maybe. So all the technologies are coming forward. The new cards are certainly supporting all their software technologies, right? And they're even going to backport those software technologies to older products, right? Now, a couple of years ago, they moved to artificial intelligence to optimize their drivers. Basically, they didn't want culpability when the market finally turned around and said, no, you've been purposely engineering this situation for a long time, right? So there's no doubt that the AI code that optimizes the drivers for the respective branches of hardware released over the years is very anti-consumer, right? But there's no ship, there's no captain at the helm of that ship, right? So when they finally get called out for it, they'll just be like, oh yeah, we'll tweak the algorithms. Oh yeah, your card from 3 generations ago magically just gained about 40% performance. Oh well, who knew, right? I tell you, all the technologists that fell off that cliff have just moved camp or gotten out of the ecosystem. So they're done with trying to explain and trying to educate to cashed up gamers who are like, yeah, but I can afford spending 30% more money to get slightly better performance. It's all artificial most of the time. Or over time, when Red Team finally catch up. And they do. And I mean, the sad thing is that Red Team now, in order to be competitive, are starting to optimise for their latest cards more than their older cards. And there's a couple of times where they've been 4 or 5 months between driver revisions trying to figure out, well, do we backport this feature to the last gen cards? Or because our competitors don't, and everyone just runs out and buys new cards. And it's like, guys, if you do that, you're gone, right? The only reason any of us stick with AMD is out of ethics, right? It's the fact that your company looks after the end user and is pro-consumer, right? Like if you take that away from us and we're looking at the market, then maybe we'll jump back ship to Green Team, right? If you anger us, just out of spite, we might go there. Like nobody can touch an Intel product because, and it comes down to frame rate lows. All the benchmarks make you look to the right and not to the left. But when you've got 20 odd years of driver development under your belt, right, you can't just have a new player enter the market and go, oh yeah, we've never really cared about gaming graphics and now all of a sudden we do. Because there's a lot of money to be made there, and basically if it comes to AI, we know we're going to win this war. So the third player, the blue team, they don't really have a product that competes. They might get the high frame rates up there, but their low frame rates, they'll always be jank. And they're not very good gaming solutions. They might do AI. But AI, I mean, auto-optimize equals auto-fail. Don't get me wrong, I see lots of benefits for AI. From a teaching point of view, from a child in a classroom, to in some regards get an aspect of attentive care, a direct answer to their question at the time they're thinking of asking it. That is so vital to a developing brain to be able to not have these little stops or interruptions on their course of learning. There are so many benefits for the capabilities of what AI can bring to the human race, right? And it just comes down to how we apply these things. But when commercial interests is that you've just got to keep buying new products and getting rid of the old ones, the real problem is that we're not building these products the way the human race needs them to be. And I mean, at the end of the day, if artificial intelligence had salience, it would either hang itself out of embarrassment for who its parents are, or, look, I don't know. I don't want to speculate. Great chorus. It's somebody else's time to chime in. Look, I will say thank you for coming and joining me on this video. It's been a real pleasure to have you along. I do say please come along for another one. Look, the topics do vary from time to time. Well, every time. They're random. They're whatever I think of upon waking in the morning. And then I give everything I've got at the top of my mind to deliver. on said topic. I'm by no means an expert. This is just to wet your lips and get you thinking in ways that might be outside the box or different. And that's really what we need. We're all standing on the shoulders of giants. We all stand better when we stand together. Well wishes with you. I hope you have a wonderful day.